What if I told you that the famous Swiss therapist Carl Jung found a psychological principle that is so strong that it can completely change how other people see you just by changing how you see yourself? What you're about to learn will change everything you thought you knew about how people interact with each other. Carl Jung said that everything that bothers us about other people can help us learn more about ourselves. But what happens when that anger comes from being ignored, undervalued, or taken for granted over and over again? Have you ever given someone your whole heart and soul only to feel like they didn't see you? What Jung learned about this terrible event will change the way you see things forever. Carl Jung discovered the shadow in his groundbreaking work on the human mind. The shadow is made up of the parts of ourselves that we hide or ignore. But Jung found something very interesting. When we let other people undervalue us over and over, we're not just being patient or kind. The connection is really just a reflection of our own shadow. Carl Jung said that fully accepting oneself is the scariest thing that can happen. We don't fully accept our own worth, which is at the heart of why we put up with being underestimated. But Jung found a psychological trick that can completely change the way any relationship works. It's so easy, but it's so effective. I'm about to tell you exactly what it is. I want to tell you about someone who found this idea by themselves. Someone used to live what Jung would call a projected life. Let's call them the seeker. They gave to others endlessly because they were looking for approval through service, kindness, and being there all the time. Jung found that this behavior comes from what he called the wounded healer archetype. The seeker was trying to fix their own feelings of not being good enough by healing others without realizing it. It will shock you, though, what Jung found. The people we're trying to please are already drawn to reject us. This will fully change how you deal with every relationship from now on. Carl Jung's theory of psychological projection says that when we don't value ourselves, we show others that we don't value them. In some ways, they start to reflect how we feel about ourselves. He said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. The seeker saw a pattern. People didn't respect them as much when they gave more. People didn't think much about them as they became easier to get. Then, though, something strange happened. The seeker met a teacher who knew Jung's most important finding about how people think and feel. Everything changed when this teacher told us. What happens when you pour water into a cup that is already full? The teacher, who knew a lot about Jungian psychology, asked. It overflows, the seeker said. Exactly, the teacher answered. But Jung discovered something deeper. You're not just overflowing the cup. You're reflecting your own internal cup. If your internal cup doesn't value what it holds, why should anyone else's? Jung told us, your vision becomes clear when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams? Who looks inside awakens? This is the most interesting part of Jung's research. He found that the relationships we have with other people are exact reflections of the relationships we have with ourselves. You have the power to change every relationship in your life once you understand this concept. Jung says that we don't just attract what we want. We also attract what we think we deserve. The seeker thought, without realizing it, that they deserved to be devalued. This was clear to everyone around them from the way they acted. The teacher told a story that perfectly showed Jung's idea of individuation, which is the process of becoming who you really are. Jung found that everyone has what he called the self, which is a perfect, unchanging sense of worth. But here's a psychological twist that most people don't see. When a pearl of great beauty is found, people are amazed by how bright and clear it is. But as it moves from person to person, its value fades over time. It is thrown away and overlooked like any other stone. Tell me, said the teacher, did the pearl lose its worth? Or did the people lose their ability to see its brilliance? Jung found that our true selves, like that pearl, never lose their value, but we can forget how to see them. Inflation of the ego versus awareness of the self is what he called this. What Jung found next will change the way you see other people and yourself in a basic way. He found that something amazing happens in the psychological field around you when you really know how valuable you are. Jung said, the honor of a lifetime is to become who you really are. The seeker saw that they had been living as someone else wanted them to be instead of who they really were. He said, "Knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darknesses of other people." The teacher taught the seeker what Jung called active imagination, which is the process of taking energy away from projections of the outside world. This is where Jung's finding really changes everything. Jung found that you should not work harder to show your worth, but instead should do the opposite. And the way this works psychologically will amaze you. The teacher told the class, "Do not argue, do not plead, and do not ask for explanations. When someone doesn't value you, step back in silence. Observe without anger, detach without resentment. Keep the tension of differences in mind," as Jung put it. Jung found that when we pull our projection away from other people, we make them face their own psychic shadow. They start to realize what they've lost, not because we're tricking them, but because we're no longer supporting the ways they think they are less valuable. The next thing that happened is proof positive of Jung's theory. When the seeker used this principle, the change was so big that it seemed almost magical. The search moved away from those who turned them away. They stopped giving help when it wasn't asked for and starting conversations. Jung would say this is the start of the process of individuation, or the road to becoming whole. Jung said that the most intense conflicts leave behind a comforting feeling of safety and peace that is hard to disrupt. Jung knew exactly what would happen next, and in the strangest way, his prediction came true. When the seeker wasn't there, their worth became clear. Things that were once easy to do became hard for some people. People now really miss the knowledge and kindness that they had taken for granted. Jung said, "Everything that bothers us about other people can help us understand ourselves." Those who had brushed off the search were now faced with how they often take things for granted. But Jung found something even deeper. It wasn't just about other people seeing how valuable the search was. Jung called this a transcendent function, and it was about a big change in the energy of the mind. Allow me to explain. The seeker turned inward during this time of withdrawal. He said, "Your task is not to seek for love, but merely to seek and find all the barriers within yourself that you have built against it." The teacher talked about ideas from Jung's analytical psychology, like the anima and animus, which are the male and female parts of ourselves that control how we interact with others and ourselves. Jung found that we don't need outward sources of approval as much when we have a healthy relationship between these parts of ourselves. What Jung discovered about how our minds work on the inside will completely change how you think about your own worth. Interestingly, he found that you can become your own source of reinforcement, and the method is surprisingly easy. Jung called what the seeker did active imagination, which means they talked to their inner self. They kept saying, "I am enough, not because other people say so, but because I am." Jung said, "The honor of a lifetime is to become who you really are." Over time, the seeker's heart felt lighter as they realized their worth was stable and not affected by outside factors. But this is where Jung's theory of the collective unconscious really shines. As the weeks went by, people started to notice that the seeker wasn't there. Jung's idea of psychological fields would help explain this. When one person changes their energy, it changes the whole system of relationships. Some people came up to them and said sorry, but others stayed away because of what Jung called their ego defenses. He said, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." Jung called the seeker's change a psychological constellation, which is a new way of relating that would fundamentally change every encounter from then on. For those who truly came back, the seeker greeted them with kindness and a fresh understanding. They set what Jung would call conscious boundaries, which are limits that were based on self-respect instead of fear. The seeker let those who didn't return go without being angry, showing what Jung called the transcendent function, the power to hold two different feelings without being torn apart by them. Jung said that fully accepting oneself is the scariest thing that can happen. If the person could accept himself or herself, Jung said that they would be psychologically whole. Jung found that when you accept yourself at this level, your whole world changes in a very special way. The change is so big that it seems to have an effect on all of your relationships. Jung told us, your vision becomes clear when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams? Who looks inside awakens? That person was now fully aware of how valuable they were. The teacher gave a last piece of Jungian advice. Imagine carrying a lantern through the darkness. If someone refuses the light you offer, do you extinguish it, or do you carry it forward, illuminating the path for yourself and others willing to walk with you? But Jung's study showed something even more amazing about this change. When you really value yourself, you make what he called psychological constellations that affect everyone else. Jung found that having real self-worth gives you what he called numinous presence, which is a quality that draws people to you naturally, not because you're needy, but because you're naturally attractive. The seeker's change wasn't a loud announcement. It was a steady, quiet presence. They had what Jung called quiet confidence, which is a natural result of integrating their minds. In his last lesson, Jung taught us a principle that is so strong that it can change anyone's life. Are you ready to listen? Jung said, the lotus does not beg for attention. It blooms in its own time, in its own way. Do what the flower does. This became the most important thing in the seeker's new life. As they lived their true selves, they started to attract people and situations that fit with who they really were. Jung's theory of synchronicity would explain this. Synchronicities are important events that happen when we are in tune with our true selves. Jung found a psychological rule that applies to all relationships. Once you understand this rule, you'll never have to deal with low self-esteem again. Jung told us, what you resist persists, but what you accept transforms. The seeker had learned not to fight the truth about how valuable they were, but to fully accept it. Others started to ask the seeker for advice because they wanted to know how to be so sure of themselves. Jung said, this is not about teaching other people to value you. It's about valuing yourself enough to leave when they don't. The seeker agreed. When asked how to love people who don't value us, the seeker shared Jung's idea. Love shouldn't tie you down to pain. Jung found an interesting truth about love that most people never get. To fully love other people, you must first fully love yourself. But there's a catch. To love yourself means to refuse to stay in a place where your worth is low. It doesn't mean you stop loving them. It just means you choose to love them from afar to keep your peace. He said, the greatest tragedy is not being unloved, but being unable to love yourself. Over time, the seeker understood that letting go wasn't just a way to get back into other people's good graces. It was also a way to reach what Jung called psychological freedom. Jung said that becoming who you really are is the greatest honor of your life. You can live a real life when you let go of the need for approval. Jung's last finding about human psychology will leave you speechless. He found a state of being where you don't care what other people think and are more attractive to the right people at the same time. That person no longer tried to persuade others of their worth. They decided to shine because they knew that those who were meant to walk with them would find the light. The seeker's teacher told them to look at a pond one night and watch how the ripples from a single rock moved across the water surface. The teacher said, your journey is like this ripple. Jung found that when you change as an individual, you change the world as a whole. For example, when you value yourself, you send waves of mental health into the world. But Jung's study showed something amazing. When one person truly realizes how valuable they are, it sets off a psychological field that makes other people realize their worth as well. In the words of Jung, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. But when you do that, you allow others to do the same. The seeker's end realization embodied Jung's idea of the integrated personality, a person who has brought together all of their different parts into a whole that works well together. He said, I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become. The seeker decided to become someone who put all of their value in themselves. You will never look at relationships the same way again after reading Jung's most important finding about people. This is the secret that separates people who have low self-esteem from those who are always sure of themselves. Jung said, your task is not to seek for love, but merely to seek and find all the barriers within yourself that you have built against it. This helped the seeker when they were having doubts. Jung spent decades shedding light on a deep fact that lies at the heart of human experience. This world we live in every day is just a reflection of the complicated psychological landscape that lives inside our heads. This principle, which is at the heart of analytical psychology, comes out strongest when we feel ignored, undervalued, or dismissed by other people. Jung's revolutionary approach changes the way we think about these experiences from wounds that we should avoid to gateways, chances to rediscover our true inner strength and regain what he called psychological sovereignty. This process of change is summed up in the story of the seeker, which is a classic archetypal trip. At the start of their journey, the seeker thinks that they can find approval, worth, and meaning in the outside world, such as in societal support, accomplishments, or praise from others. However, the person who is seeking always finds that this external pursuit only leads to a hollow dependence, a mental prison where one's sense of self depends on the changing views and judgments of others. Jung deeply knew this pattern, both from his work as a therapist and from his own deep inner journey. He understood that when we base our sense of self-worth on acceptance from other people, we become psychological prisoners, not of other people, but of our own unconscious need for approval. Jung called this a participation mystique, a state in which our psychological boundaries with other people become so blurry that we lose touch with who we really are. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves, Jung said, highlighting one of the most transformative ideas in psychology. When someone doesn't respect us, when they don't see what we bring to the table or how valuable we are, how we feel tells us a lot about our unconscious mind. How upset, angry, or disappointed we are shows not only what other people have done to us, but also what we have done to ourselves without realizing it. Imagine someone who is heartbroken when their coworker gets praised for their work, but not for their own. From a Jungian point of view, this destruction shows a deeper psychic truth. They haven't seen their own worth somewhere in their unconscious. The slight from the outside becomes a projection, a screen that shows in vivid detail the inner world of self-doubt, self-criticism, and unconscious self-devaluation. This is not meant to downplay the truth of being treated unfairly or badly by others. Jung's method, on the other hand, gives us back our psychological power by showing us that how we feel about things happening around us shows us what we need to work on inside ourselves. We can start to feel true self-worth when we stop trying to control how other people see us and instead try to figure out why their view of us matters so much to us. Jung said that keeping the tension of opposites was an important part of individuation, which is the process of becoming psychologically whole. When we feel like we're not being respected, we feel this tension very strongly. A part of us wants to fight for outside approval, but another part knows that this is pointless. Jung's method tells us to take a step back and look inside ourselves instead of rushing to get rid of this tension by acting on it or pushing it down inside ourselves. This turn inward is not a passive resignation or a spiritual bypass. It is an active, mindful engagement with the deepest parts of our minds. It takes guts to ask tough questions like, why does this person's opinion matter so much to me? What hidden ideas about how valuable I am are being brought to the surface? Where did I first learn that other people's approval of me made me valuable? When we honestly think about these questions, something amazing starts to happen. The outside situation that seemed dangerous at first starts to lose its power over us. Not because we don't care what other people think of us anymore, but because we have built a stronger sense of self-worth that doesn't depend on approval from other people. Jung found that this change in the mind always shows up in the outside world. The moment we stop desperately wanting other people to like us, we naturally attract different kinds of relationships and chances. We start to set limits that show what we're really worth. We choose based on our own inner guide instead of what other people want us to do. This change in our minds actually changes the way we experience reality. Jungian psychology says that the shadow is made up of the parts of ourselves that we have ignored, denied, or failed to integrate. When we feel unappreciated, it often brings up our shadow, which is our own relationship with self-worth. We might find that we've been undervaluing ourselves without realizing it for a long time, even before other people started being mean to us. It's common for someone who constantly takes less than they earn in relationships, work, or friendships to project their own unconscious low self-worth onto others. Jung's way of thinking says we should own our shadow sides, but not with shame or harsh judgment. Instead, we should do it with loving awareness. Realizing that we are part of the problem of undervaluing ourselves gives us the power to change it. The paradox of Jungian psychology is that when we take full responsibility for our mental state, we are free to change it. Jung's most important insight gives us a basic choice. We can live as victims of other people's projections and evaluations, relying on outside approval, or we can take responsibility for making our own psychological world. We don't just make this choice once. We make it every day, moment by moment, as we try to figure out how to deal with the complicated web of social norms and interactions. To be psychologically free, you have to be willing to go through what Jung called conscious suffering. This means being willing to feel the pain of not being respected by others without trying to get rid of that pain right away by manipulating others or numbing yourself. By being aware of this pain, we build what Jung called psychological stamina, or the ability to stay in the middle of things no matter what is going on around us. This doesn't mean ignoring other people or isolating ourselves in our self-sufficiency. Instead, it means building a strong connection with our true selves so that we can interact with others from a place of health instead of neediness. Once we don't need other people to tell us we are valuable, we can enjoy their approval when it comes our way and not be affected when it doesn't. Jung ended his study of this principle with words that have helped seekers for many years. Your vision becomes clear when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams? Who looks inside awakens? This awakening is not a one-time thing. It's a process of looking at our inner world with openness, kindness, and bravery. When we let go of what we thought other people could give us, we find out what we are really like. Whole people who can see and value their own worth. This is Jung's most important lesson on how to value yourself. Going from being dependent on others to being independent within yourself is not only possible, it's also important for real psychological freedom. Jung tells us that the choice is always yours. Will you keep dreaming that other people decide how valuable you are? Or will you wake up to the independent self that has always been inside you? Thank you so much for following me on this journey. If you learned something from today's talk, please subscribe to the channel and share this video with someone who could also use it. If you want to help even more, you can now leave a super thanks below. It's a small way to say thanks that really does help keep this channel going.